Welcome to the Sensible Center podcast, where two middle-aged guys drunkenly talk politics and political reform. Grab an adult beverage and enjoy the show. Further information can be found at sensiblecenterpack.com. You can reach us at sensiblecenterpack@gmail.com or follow us on X at U.S.A. Pack.
Hey, Bob.
Kevin, welcome back to the States.
Long time no hear.
Been a while.
Yeah, it was a long journey out to Indonesia, of all places. Never thought I'd say I was going to Indonesia. You know, you say Bali, and people don't realize that it's Indonesia, I think, sometimes.
I didn't at first. So
Yeah, you know, cause, you think it's like, because I always equate all those Pacific islands, like Tahiti and Fiji, and which aren't part of that archipelago. I don't even know how to say it. That I think there's like 17,000 islands in Indonesia or something crazy like that.
I did not realize that either. I knew the Philippines had a lot as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of little islands and a couple, probably 10 big ones. Very interesting place. People very nice and kind, and I've never turned down so many rides. They like their motorbikes. Like I would say probably 95% motorbikes to cars. And they're very into the they call it Grab there, not Uber. But you literally can't walk like 2 feet without some guy pulling up on his motorbike asking if you want to ride. And then you would just hop on. I think I saw like 3 or 4 people on a motorbike at a time. I saw dogs driving on motorbikes. I saw whole families on motorbikes. I saw restaurants on motorbikes. I never rode on one. Deb rode on one. But they have, they call it Grab. It was very, we took a couple cars here and there, but as I mentioned, those trips were very inexpensive, and hiring any sort of service employee is very inexpensive. You could get a guide, all-day guide for like $50, including driving you anywhere you want to go. And most of our trips were like $1 or $2, and massages were between $10 and $15. And so, from that standpoint, the food, you could have got a meal for a couple bucks. Nice island. I would recommend anyone to go there if they could just, blink their eyes and show up. But from here, it's a long ride. Then, as I mentioned, we got diverted on the way home to Tokyo because some guy got drunk on the plane, and I guess they didn't want to fly across the Pacific with some belligerent guy in the back of the plane. So that was fun. So that made it a little longer. So that's my news. I think I'm still dealing with the jet lag, but it was very nice.
How was the food?
Very nice trip. Interesting. I mean, they have their dishes. I would say it's like a mix. Sort of a little bit of Thai. They like things spicy. A little bit of Thai influence, a little bit of Indian influence, I think. Because they're on Bali, they're a Hindu population. I think the rest of Indonesia is Muslim. So I think the Indian subcontinent brought Hindu over. So I think they have more of that influence within their food. A lot of satay, which is kind of just grilled chicken, rice dishes, some noodle dishes, but mostly rice. And then, mostly chicken, some pork, not too much beef. As you can imagine, I think that's, again, the Indian influence with the cows and the sacredness of cows and cattle. I like Thai food sort of better, and Japanese obviously has a different food culture. I wouldn't say necessarily go there for the food, but they definitely have their own Balinese cuisine, which is kind of interesting that an island can develop and lots of very much a international tourist crowd, mostly I would say young, like 2030s. Seems to be very popular amongst that crowd because I think there's a lot of adventure type of sporting type stuff, hiking, waterfalls, rafting, all that good stuff. Reminds me of Hawaii, so it's kind of Hawaii with the different cultural element. So all in all, pretty good. What's new here in the States? I think everything's calmed down, right?
I think so, for the most part.
For the most part.
The debate
No,
last night.
no assassination
The big
attempts while I was gone.
I don't know. Did that last one happen while you were gone?
No, I think it happened when I was still here.
Okay.
I think so, yeah. It's
Yeah.
hard to keep track of them at this point. So yeah, we had the debate last night, the vice presidential debate, which sounds like it might be the last debate of the campaign season. I think it's getting a little late to get anything scheduled now because I'm sure they'd have to prep and stuff. So I think if I think Kamala's agreed to do one on CNN. I can't see Trump agreeing to do one on CNN. If I was him, I would say I would want Fox or some more friendly news media, and we could talk.
He's done two now, right? He's done two on
Yeah, he's done two, two different opponents
unfriendly. Yeah.
on an unfriendly territory, and we could talk about what this one and kind of what I think the moderators did. This was CBS, right?
Yeah.
So let's do what we did before. Let's rate them off the top. So let's give our ratings simultaneously. Do you have a rating in mind?
Yeah, I
All right.
think so.
So let's do JD first.
All right.
So 1, 2, 3, B plus.
A minus.
You said A minus? I
Yeah.
said B plus. Why? What drove the A minus for you?
Overall, first he had a calm demeanor. He was very composed. He made his points clearly and concisely. He took opportunities to respond, and he did it in a clear manner with points. And he kind of also hit Waltz. He took a couple low shots, but he did it in a professional manner, if you will. I think he really kind of was hitting on all cylinders last night.
Yeah, I would say my B plus. Clearly, he was trying to kind of. I think I heard somebody on CNN say, "whitewash the crazy" or something. Sane wash the crazy, something like that. And he's well spoken. Clearly good at this type of scenario. I've never seen him debate before. You see him speak, but not in more sound bites than not. So I think from his train of thought, his demeanor, everything like that, I think that was good. I think he missed. I mean, he didn't go in for the kill, I would say,
That's true.
and I think he had opportunities to. I mean, we were chatting back and forth, and we could talk about the topics raised, but there were a lot of things that weren't raised. I thought he would try to paint. I think his job was paint Waltz as a far left liberal, and I don't think he did that. I think it seemed like they were both sort of moderates. They were saying that they agreed with each other sometimes, and
Yeah.
neither of them kind of went for it. And I think
where he really kind of went after him effectively was the abortion bill.
yeah,
Right?
we could talk about that. I did look that up because that was something that Walz, we talked during neither of them had the language of the bill. And the reason why is that it's actually in the Minnesota's Constitution. It's kind of this right um, over your body. And I guess there was a court case that affirmed that back, I believe, in the 90s because somebody challenged the constitutionality of it. And so I think last year, 2023, with what happened nationally with the Supreme Court, I think Minnesota was worried that if the makeup of their Supreme Court would have changed, that a different ruling could have been made on the constitutionality within the state constitution, not the federal constitution. And so they put together a bill kind of laying out what was basically in the Constitution, kind of reiterating it. And I think ultimately it's pretty wide ranging, but I don't think it says what JD was saying that it said in regards to, I mean, it definitely, I think, would allow late term abortions, but this idea of kind of the live baby, I mean, I'd rather not talk about it, but I think the idea is that if you're having an abortion and it's not successful, that it's sort of a botched abortion, then what do you do? I think that's what, unfortunately, we're talking about here.
Yep, and at that point, you can't. I don't think you can claim it before either. But even if you make that argument, it's no longer the mother's body.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a horrible thing to have happen. But then the question is, if the intent was, I don't think it's fair to say that that's a live birth abortion. And I think that's kind of how Trump and JD are trying to frame it. I mean, I hate even talking about it. But I think that's kind of what I don't think that's
the baby's alive.
Yeah, but it's much more complicated than that. It's much more nuanced, and I think they're just trying to score political points on that. And I think that's partly why neither of them kind of laid it out, because once you start talking about the details of it, it's easier to kind of put it in a soundbite and try to gain political points on it. I mean, the point of the matter is, if Trump has stated all the time that it should be the states that determine these things, right? And if it's in the Minnesota Constitution and the Democratic elected legislature, which I think in Minnesota's both houses are Democratic, and you have a Democratic governor, and they wanted to protect that right that's in their Constitution, that's what the people of Minnesota decided, and to pin it on something that Walz is driving one way or another, I don't think is fair either, especially since that's your whole case, that it should be states determining and the people that the states determining it. So if they could determine that it could be banned or a 6-week ban or whatever, then you should also respect a state that might decide the other way, right?
Yeah, I think I'm not. I understand what you're saying. I don't have. I'm not going to say I agree with the logic or the results, but I will say that I think Vance was trying to get Walz to admit to it. You signed this. You signed off on this. Do you support this? Right? Do you support this? Do you support killing the baby after it's born? And he not only did he not bite, but he knows darn well how the bill's written and what it means. And I mean, I think there's a record of it happening in Minnesota 8 times. I think I saw that. It might have been CNN earlier. I had a guest on that said, you know, there's a record of it happening 8 times in Minnesota in I don't know how many years. The point was, hey, Walz, do you support this? And instead of Walz saying yes or no, he said, well, that's not true. It doesn't exist. Right.
Well, it's much more complicated than what he's presenting, right?
Well, no, it's a simple question: yes or no. Do you support it, that the law as it's written?
Oh, he signed the bill, so
So he does. It's
right.
obvious. So instead of
It's in
just
their
saying that, hey,
constitution.
well, I signed the bill, it's, oh, that's not what it said.
Well, I think it's a fact that he signed the bill, and there was a reason why, and that might not even be his personal desire, right? I mean, it's in the state constitution, and the legislature passed it, so he would have to have a pretty good reason for rejecting it, right? That would be against what the people want, right, of his state. So, I mean, it's just more nuanced than that, and each individual situation, I think the point was, I think that he made is that he supports that a woman would have autonomy over her body, which is what's in the Constitution. But like you said, in certain cases, limited cases, that doesn't happen, right? That that there's a situation, and it's unfortunate, and I see why he's trying to draw the political point, but that's kind of, yeah, that's a tough one. Um, so, yeah, I mean, you could consider that a jump ball. Um, I think, I think, I think JD did a good job of kind of resurrecting his image with people. But I do think, I was thinking back on it, and Waltz kind of let him get away with it for the most part. And then it was sort of, you remember in, I'm going to bring up It's a Wonderful Life here. Are you a fan of that movie at all? You know
Yeah, I like
movie?
that movie. I try to watch it every year. I
Okay.
don't go out of my way to watch it, but if it's on, I watch it.
So you remember, although, Waltz maybe look like Mr. Potter rather than George Bailey, but you remember when George Bailey was talking to Mr. Potter, and Potter was, buttering him up and trying to get him to stay, or he was offering him and everything, and then George shook his hand, and he shook his clammy hand, and then he kind of woke up and said, "Wait a second." That reminded me of when Waltz woke up, sort of like in the last 5 minutes when they were talking about the election, the 2020 election, and then he realized, wait a second, this guy is crazy. He has some very crazy opinions. And I think he was actually shocked when JD didn't answer the question that I think Waltz posed to him about whether Trump lost the 2020 election. It was sort of like he was under the spell sort of a little bit, and then he snapped out of it right at the last minute. So I was thinking about that today, and it just reminded me of that scene where George Bailey just, wait a second. No, I'm not.
Yeah, so
I'm not your friend. You're not who you look like here. You've said crazy stuff. You believe crazy stuff. I've called you weird.
Before we get into too much about him, let's go ahead and do the rating of Waltz.
Oh, of Waltz. All right. I think I might revise what I put down. Because after what I just said, I might back up. So, all right. Waltz. 1, 2, 3. B.
B.
Oh, we got B's. So we're not that far off again. I lowered. I had an A minus, and then I just convinced myself that it was a B because Waltz sort of fell for the act, I think. Originally, go ahead.
When I've seen him, speaking at the, what do you call them, campaign events, he was definitely more eccentric, right? Both in body movement and how he talks. I was surprised kind of how he kind of reined it in and was as reserved as he was last night, and that's really a large part of why I rated him a B. And I think he was pretty well spoken overall too, kind of like Vance.
So you would have rated him lower if he had been more kind
I
of
think so,
eccentric
because
and kind of,
I
yeah.
think it would distract from the point. That becomes the story, right? It's an attacking point. Um, I do think, one of the reasons I would mark him down is what we've already talked about. Um, Also, the whole you said you were a Tiananmen Square thing, and then he's more or less like, well, I'm from Nebraska. Why did
He
you lie
is from
about
the, he
Tiananmen
is from
Square? He
Nebraska,
said,
though.
well, I'm from Nebraska. That's, he never answered why he lied about it. He
He
went on
said
to
he
some long
misspoke.
rant
He did
about,
get
and then,
around to being
yeah,
misspoken.
he's
He's,
misspoken about lots of
hey,
things. His
we
position in the
all misspeak.
military
We all misspeak.
and
Come on.
being in a fighting in a war that he had at minimum best implied. What I give him a pass for, and even last night when even last night when he did it, I thought that's nothing, easy mistake to make, and it happened to him 2 or 3 times. But remember, did you hear him say that he was friends with the school shooter?
Yep, I did hear him. See?
It came
They
out of his mouth, and I
misspeak.
was
He
like,
gets
well,
excited. Certain
that's
people
not what he
misspeak.
that's not what he meant, right? Obviously, that's not what he meant.
You
He said
sure?
that. That's not what he meant.
Okay, so
He's getting kind of ripped apart and by the far right
it's a
kind
good
of
meme.
mouthpieces.
It's a good meme, right?
Yeah, it's a good meme.
So
And he deserves the memes, but he doesn't deserve to lose a point for that, or a grade. I don't think.
yeah,
Just
that's
meh. Yeah.
well. Here's the thing. If you believe in conspiracy theories, do you think he said that on purpose to show that he just sort of misspeaks?
No,
No,
I
you
mean,
didn't think
'cause
it's
he
that.
did do it 2 or 3 times. No, I did that because that's a different type of misspeaking. He meant to say something else and he skipped a couple words. That's one thing. Repeatedly
I, I think
during a campaign, misrepresenting your record is
it's different.
completely, and it's different. And he's got a
Yeah,
record of doing that.
I don't know how many times he said those things. I don't. I sometimes I think maybe he said it once or twice, and I think his stuff in regards to his service and things like that. I mean, some of that's gray and whatnot, but yeah, you could say that he's overstated the case. I think he was trying to say that he's from Nebraska, and I think he's not polished, and he kind of just gets excited about things sometimes. And as you indicated, in some of the rallies, he clearly gets excited, and his movements and his actions indicate that, and he might not necessarily think about what he's saying before he says it. So, I mean, take that for what it is. Um, that's a kind way to look at it, I guess, rather than being deceitful on purpose, which I would say the other side does a bit more. But whatever. Um, I don't think any of that sticks. Maybe it does with certain people. Um, like I said, I did think he kind of fell. I think overall, this debate was much better than the presidential debate, and all I could equate that to was that Trump wasn't there, but which then lends a certain difference to the debating style. I do think they covered more policy, and you get somewhat of their different views on things. Although, like I said, I was surprised how much they kind of sort of didn't necessarily have a lot of clear differences on some things.
What impressed me about, or one example anyway, with Vance was when Waltz basically said my son was, he saw a shooting or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and Vance was like, that's terrible. Sorry you had to go through that, etc. He didn't ignore it. He also didn't say, that didn't happen, or why didn't I hear about that before? If it's real, did that really happen? I mean, he didn't pull any of that stuff. And if there's any falsehood to that at all, it'll come out in the media, over the next week or two, which is kind of interesting. Let the media do your job for you. Where I think it's very possible Trump would have been more. He would have handled it differently. And that to me is a definite contrast. Almost to the point where, you get 4 years down the road and these are two guys that, maybe we're better off with something like that happening. Well,
JD would definitely be, and given Trump's kind of advanced age, he will be the oldest president in history. I think we really have to consider whether JD would need to step in that role at some point, right?
It could happen.
More likely than Waltz, but and maybe that's what he was, trying to show, or next time, rather than kind of burn the bridges and go all in, it's an interesting strategy to kind of be the reasonable and a different. I don't know if Waltz was surprised by that demeanor or whether they prepped for it. It'd be interesting to see whether they prepped more for kind of the well-spoken, reasonable JD or the flamethrower JD. Because I think Waltz came out a little.
He was
just
nervous.
just like Kamala. I think just like Kamala, she came out a little bit nervous and then got their footing under them sort of after like 10 or 15 minutes, which I think is a bad maneuver in debates because I don't think people stay tuned for long on those. I think they catch it. I don't think generally people watch the whole thing.
I got distracted with
right
towards the end there. I don't know, the last maybe 15, 20 minutes of it, I wasn't paying full attention.
Yeah,
until
I think,
maybe the closing arguments again. I was back on, but I didn't turn it off. I had other stuff going on.
Yeah, I think in today's day and age, to expect people to sit through an hour 45 minutes of anything straight, especially a political debate, is kind of too much. That's probably why people cut off our podcast after a while.
Yeah, sooner or later, yeah. And especially with the debates, now everybody's live tweeting everything and trying to score points and dunk on people anyway, so it gets to the point where you're not so much paying attention to the debate as much as you are what other people are saying about the debate, which is why I think they opt in many cases to try to get the sound bites like they do. But
yeah. So what, as far as the moderators go, clearly the Trump debate, they were coming out, this is clearly biased, mostly because of the fact checking. And I think they only fact checked JD once last night, right? Which he kind of bit back on right away, which I think he was prepared for, which is fine. He kind of basically said, I didn't think we were doing that.
Yep.
Which I would imagine was part of the rules going in. To me, and we talked about it a little bit last night, they were too talky with setup and context for questions, right? It's like, just get to the question. They were framing things too much, I think, which then, they're not going to answer directly anyway, so what are you bothering framing for? Just get them to react. I don't know what your view was on that.
I don't know. The lack in trust of media that I have, and I think other people have a growing trust or lack of trust in media, is an issue, right? For just in about everything nowadays, and this debate moderation stuff is part of that. I don't know where you get or where you go to fix the problem. I agree. It should just, here's the question. Don't frame it. Don't add context. Don't fact check, because fact checks aren't fact checks if they're not facts that you're presenting, right? And Yeah, maybe, just maybe, it should go to more of a social media thing where 5 people pre-chosen from each side, questions not known, people don't present the questions until the actual debate, and then you throw them out there, right?
Yeah,
You randomize
I
it.
kind of like that, and I think they should, and they should always follow up and say, "Well, you didn't answer the question." I
Yeah.
think I I would like them to do that too. Like, just cut them off and say, "Are you going to answer the question, or you didn't answer the question?"
They did try to do that
Ki-
last night.
Yeah, a
I
little bit,
appreciated that a little bit. Yep.
because that keeps them more honest. If they know the moderator's going to do that, because clearly that's embarrassing if you're being pointed out. And I think they should do it on both sides, because why bother asking the question if they're just going to go off, on some prepared speech, right? Um, we want to hear the answers to the questions. I mean, some of them are pretty good. They're well thought out. So to me, in this case, I think the questions that were being asked, and I wrote down a list of them. I would say that they clearly favored Walz over Vance. So you had Israel, which I guess would favor more Vance, right?
Yep.
It's the
Given
world is
the
the world is
circumstances.
burning thing, right? Under you, we didn't
Yep.
climate change, which I would think
I'm not
favor,
sure if it depends on how it's framed, right?
right? So mass deportation, sort of. I think the question was on, how are you going to go about this? Are you for mass? I think that was to Vance. They actually brought up deficit spending, which I thought was interesting. Um, I don't remember what the results of that were, but I think they were talking about their economic policies, and I think Waltz was hitting them that Trump's policies would cause more debt than his. And I'd like to, if we could go back around, I'd like to talk about two things in regards to what JD brought up after we get through the list. On energy, he was focused on energy, energy independence, energy, and he was also they were Trump's plan is largely focused on tariffs, right? So I think they're really misrepresenting things there, and I'd like to at least kind of talk about that and see if you agree with me on this. So then they talked about Waltz's fibs a little bit, but they didn't get into China at all, which I think is now a subject of an investigation in the House. I think Comer's opened an investigation of Waltz's ties to China.
Hmm.
No mention of his ties to China, which was interesting, and Jay didn't bring that up either.
No, I mean it's probably it's pretty much purely a political thing, right? I mean, obviously
No,
he spent a lot of time there.
he did lots of
He's
trips.
got views that um, support communism quite a bit, but yeah, the ties to China things, it's political.
All right.
It's a witch hunt.
So then they asked Vance about calling Trump Hitler, and I guess the recent discovery of him even later disparaging Trump's economic record, I think back in 2020 or something like that.
Yeah, and he answered that question well.
Hey, he was wrong. That's basically
Yep.
what he said,
Yep.
which I find an unsatisfactory answer. But
People are free to change their minds.
uh, yeah, then
Kamala's doing it,
then you can't.
although she hasn't said she was wrong.
Well, that's a pretty big change of mind, right? I consider that bigger than fracking when you call your running mate who you're supporting Hitler, and then you decide, and that his economic record wasn't good, and now you've kind of said he's the best thing since sliced bread. So that's kind of a big change. I would like him to try to explain that more than I was wrong. Um, then they talked about reproductive rights. We talked about gun control, which I didn't, JD's answer was not too satisfying, and I think Waltz did a decent job, and I think the idea that they're both gun owners and Waltz evidently is a pretty good shooter and whatnot, and
No, he should be with the military experience.
his answer was sometimes it's just guns because they talked about mental health.
Yeah, I don't
JD
like
talked
that
about
answer. So, I mean, that might be, again, that's a
sometimes it is
political
just guns.
answer. It's not, guns don't kill people, Kevin. People kill people.
But the number of guns, the availability of guns could
You could
lead to.
you
It's
could
a.
lay
It's not the
200
only
million
thing.
guns
It's not
on
the
your
only
front lawn
thing.
this
Clearly, it's not the only thing.
tonight, and as long as nobody touches them, I will guarantee you none of them
Well,
will hurt you.
that's a simple answer. It's not the only thing, but it is part of the equation. And to totally avoid that it's part of the equation and point to windows at schools and doors at schools and not say that maybe we have a gun access issue or an availability of gun or maybe too many guns accessible, that's ignoring part of the equation. I'm not saying that it's the only thing.
Well, I think Vance talked about mental health, and I think
mental health
is
is
a big
not
issue
guns.
in this country.
Mental health is not guns.
Mental health is
I agree. It's part of the equation.
definitely part
It's
of
all
the equation.
It's all part of the equation.
Why weren't guns killing people
But guns
in the
are
50s when kids were bringing them to school?
We didn't nearly have as many guns in the 50s. Not nearly. We've gone gun crazy. So, I agree. It's not.
Yeah, but even if you take the amount of guns and the amount of school shootings in the 50s or mass shootings in the 50s, there's not a correlation.
Oh, sure. There's a mental health thing. There's drugs. There's clearly, especially amongst the youth. I mean, you could talk about social media and depression and all of that, isolation and everything that's happened with young males. It's all part of it, and so is guns. I think that was Walt's point. Sometimes he said just the guns, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it is part of the equation.
I don't. I mean,
You
look,
don't agree.
I'm all
You
for.
don't think guns have anything to do with it.
Guns are a tool, right? And somebody who wants to do something bad with a tool is going to do it. Guns make it easier. I'll grant you that, right?
Uh-huh.
Certain guns provide an opportunity to do more damage than, let's say, a knife would. I'll grant you that. I think that's absolutely the case. That said, guns aren't killing people. People are killing people. And something's changed between the 80s and today that has triggered people to take these steps and actions, right? And maybe it's simple as, hey, these kids at Columbine, I won't say they were the first, but they were the first kind of ones who kind of went viral after doing it because media was changing and things like that, and that attention got more people concerned and involved. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know why it's happening more than it was, but I think it is obvious in this country there's more mental health issues right now than there were in the past.
I'm all for improving our
something's
support
changed, but it's not guns.
Of supporting people who have mental health issues. I'm all for that, and I'd love to see more of it. And I'd love to see less guns, because I think ultimately it is part of the equation. It's not the only thing. Actually, you spoke about knives, and I just saw something on the news this week that in Britain they're banning certain knives now. They're going around and collecting, I guess, these machetes, shoots machetes that have been used in attacks in London.
By immigrants, mostly?
Yeah. they're kind of banning those and collecting them off the streets and stuff. So to that point, yeah, you can harm somebody with anything. It's pretty hard to do a mass killing with a machete, um, as opposed to an AK, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
AK-15. So whatever.
AR-15, AK-47.
Um, I don't think we'll ever agree on that. Housing costs they talked about, which I guess would favor Vance because the rise in housing costs. Although when I was in Indonesia, we get Australians come to Indonesia a lot because it's right there, and we were watching because there wasn't too much else on TV. I was watching Australian news quite a bit, and the similarities of issues there to here, and they actually just had a big step down in inflation, and they're still higher than us, but they're talking about housing costs and availability of housing and this idea, and I think that's where Walz and Kamala haven't done a good job to kind of, we're very an isolated country here. We don't get much news from outside the world where if you watch BBC, whenever I leave the country, it's amazing how much news when you're watching other news shows. They will have many more international stories, and you'll get a better idea of what's happening around the world than watching our news.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So it's kind of,
Newspapers are the same way.
yeah, I mean, we're very isolated. And I think, I don't know why politicians haven't done it, but I think from what I know and what I've seen and what I've heard, we're, from an economic standpoint and then adjusting to inflation post COVID, I don't think anyone's got a better record than we do. And I don't see anyone arguing with that. I think actually Powell said that, and I think the numbers support that. And I think it's hard to tell people that it's worse over there, and maybe that's why they don't do it. But I think it's a valid argument when somebody's bringing it up and saying, "Oh, under yours, inflation skyrocketed and whatnot." Yes, that's true, but it's also, if you look here, you look there, and you look, everyone's had the same issue, and we've actually dealt with it better than many other places. So I think
Our Fed leads the way, and other places kind of follow.
well, whatever. If you're going to blame them for the economy, which I think is a stretch to begin with, because there's business cycles, there's tons of extenuating circumstances.
Yeah,
The idea we could get into energy too, but the idea that the president has anything to do with gas prices is a joke, and I think Waltz sort of pointed out that we actually have higher oil and gas production, record oil and gas production now, and I think
you don't think he could change the law that says we have to have a different mix in the summer versus the winter? That would affect gas prices, wouldn't it?
Did Trump do that? No.
No.
Okay. I don't know why they do that. That's sort of.
Pollution.
But the point is we have higher production, so we haven't cut back on production. That's not what's raised gas prices, and now we're in the. We're actually down. Yeah, we're in the upper 60s now per barrel or something. And I think I've talked to you about my work background and how I was involved in lending to oil production, and how it's an international market and there's speculation. We don't drive the price of gas. People just don't produce gas because they open up leases and fields and stuff. That's not really how it works. What they look at is the price per barrel, and can they make money based upon drilling. And our cost of drilling in this country is higher than it is in many other places because it's more difficult to get. Not only do we have higher production costs as in many other things, but our fields aren't necessarily as readily accessible to oil, so it's more difficult to extract. So we need a, like 45, $50 a barrel sort of break even. Um, so that really drives the production. So when it was in the 20 to $30 range uh, under Trump, that was the global gas, and that's set based upon global supply and demand. Um, we weren't actually producing that much, and we were actually shutting down production because you're not going to produce it at a loss. Um, so it's sort of interesting. I know it's kind of easy to talk about gas prices and the environmental aspects and not opening up Alaska fields and everything, but it's much more complicated than that. And people, I wish people knew kind of how it worked, because I think we should be informed about such things and not kind of fall into the soundbite that makes it for either side, one way or another. They both sort of do it and take us as fools and doing it. And another thing that sort of Trump and Vance are making people sort of as fools as regards to the tariffs. The idea that China is paying us money is just not occurring. That's not how tariffs work. And I wish Walz and Kamala would point that out.
They want to add the tariffs too, and they're trying to cater to unions.
Well, they haven't rescinded any Trump's tariffs, and I think they've extended some of them. So
Yep.
they can't really necessarily make that argument, other than Trump saying that we're getting billions and we're gonna. I think he wants to make them even bigger. I think that's. I mean, it sounds good, right? Have China pay, but that's not how it works, right? I mean, how it works is the people who imported that into this country is going to pay the tariff. Now, does the Chinese company have to lower its price and take some of that hit? They're still not paying it to us, but let's say the product's $10 and you put a 50% tariff on it. So now it's $15 to import it into this country. The Chinese company would get $10, $5 would be paid by the importer to the federal government, right? So that's how it would work. Now, would those people say, I'm not going to buy it at $15 now, China, you have to give it to me for $8 or $7, and then I'll pay whatever, $12 for it and pay the federal government? Yes, that has to do with supply and demand and elasticity and pricing and everything like that. But the fact is that China's not paying us money. It's just not occurring. So that's a big. It's either going into the price of our goods. It's either being passed on to us through the consumer. So
Tariffs
it's actually a tax
generally
to us.
Are paid by the consumer. It's
Right.
not paid by anybody else.
So
That's just how it works.
So it's not a tax on China. It's a tax on a consumer, right?
Yep.
So that's a big. To me, that's a big deal, because
I've never much cared for tariffs. Although the argument that if you had tariffs rather than an income tax, I could see that potentially as an acceptable solution.
Well, that's kind of how it started, right? I mean, that's that's the old school way of doing it, right? Because if you remember the Tea Party and all of that, that was basically, or stamp tax and all that. That's how it used to be done. The customs office used to be the biggest revenue collector. That was when Alexander Hamilton was. I think he actually ran the customs, or when he was treasurer, he set up the customs service. That's where all the revenue came in. Yeah, that's the old way of doing it. We didn't have an income tax. All the products. And, to some extent, Europe does that through VAT and things like that. So, I mean, it's a way to do it. We've never really done it in this country.
Yeah, I don't like that VAT. But you do a tariff instead of an income tax, or even if just make it all sales tax. Seems more fair to me, right?
Yeah, I think
tax on what you consume or what you buy versus that.
But again,
And
I think
even
that
then,
penalizes.
I'd be more fair with a graduated tax. Hey, if you're going to be buying products that are over, I don't know, $100,000, you're going to pay a 15% or a 20% tax on it instead of a 5% tax that you might be paying on a
Yeah,
laptop.
I would definitely say you should, like, essentials like food, energy, basic clothing. If you're going to set up a tax regime like that, you gotta make those real small, because otherwise you're really going to penalize the people who can least afford it. And then, like you said, ramp up sort of on the luxury side.
And that seems more fair to me than ramping up, like having a graduated income tax, because percentage-wise, I think is where you need to be. Everybody needs to be paying an equal percentage, and if they're going to be doing income tax.
So you'd rather tax consumption than
Yep,
income.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think either way. I think it might be actually cleaner to tax consumption, because then it's really hard to have loopholes when you do that, right?
Exactly. No more loopholes.
Because as a small business owner, I collected
No
sales
more
tax.
paying H&R Block or whoever you're using to do your taxes.
I collected
$500 a
yeah,
year.
I collected sales tax and had to remit it, and they're very serious about collecting that sales tax.
Sure they are.
It's really hard to mess around with that too much. But I'm sure there are ways, but it's a little bit harder to hide than income tax. But so at least we agree that Trump's tax program is foolish.
Well, I don't know if I said that. I mean, lowering taxes is good if you can. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a fan of tariffs. I've never really have been. I think it hurts the consumer overall. That taxes on anything hurts the consumer, but obviously we have to tax somewhere.
Yep. So getting back to the debate, I think JD didn't. There was no talk of, Waltz and his COVID regime in Minnesota. The spying on your neighbor type thing. I think that was a lost opportunity. None of the George Floyd stuff came up. There was no questions I think that's. I mean, that doesn't tie to Kamala, but it does tie to Waltz quite a bit. And
Yeah,
I think
it really does, especially when Walt says, "Well, my stance is mind your own damn business." When he was asking neighbors to tell on each other if they had family over. I mean, they could have called him out on that. But again, too, you can only cover so much in a debate, and
yeah, but I think the big opportunity was to paint him, because I think if he can paint him as sort of the crazy liberal that then goes and reflects on
well,
Kamala, and I
mm,
think he has more of a record in regards to that, because coming from Minnesota and being a governor of a pretty liberal state, um, I think he could have done a better job of saying, hey, don't buy that they're not far left. Um, let's see, what didn't we talk about? I think that pretty much covers it. So generally, pretty good. Um, I like that it was more substantive. Made it a little less fun, but I think it was good to have a a debate where you look at those two guys and say, somebody said last night that maybe people are thinking, well, why are these two not the choices rather than
yeah,
rather than the people on the top of the
yeah,
ticket?
I really do find Kamala to be just a terrible, terrible candidate. I don't, I'm not asking you to say right now, like, who do you think's going to win, but if you were, what's your gut feel right now? I mean, do you have a good read on who's going to win this?
No, I don't.
I don't either. I
I
really don't know.
I'm I'm going to be out of the country again on election day. I did I did fill out my ballot this week. I thought about it and like, do I want to fill it out beforehand? Actually, I was going to read. It's kind of interesting how many people are on the ballot, right? We say we don't have a choice, but we do, right? I took
Yeah,
a
I mean, Joe
I took
Stein's on there
I
again,
took a
right?
picture of my ballot. Where's my ballot? Oh, I might have deleted it already. I didn't want it up in the cloud. Yeah, there was like Stein. You got RFK. You got Cornell West. There was actually a couple more. I would say that the presidential was probably seven or eight. 7 or 8 choices. It was pretty long. So we do have a choice, right? It's kind of interesting. You couldn't vote for somebody else.
Yep.
It's kind
It'd
of
be
interesting.
interesting too. Maybe more people will vote for other people.
I mean, I voted for somebody else often, right? I just don't think it's a time to vote for somebody else. I don't know.
Well, that's how they get you.
Well,
I usually do vote for somebody else,
they don't
but
get me often, but I just think
yeah.
I think in the the last couple elections, it's like no, we need to we can't engage in this. Um, so and then I thought, do I fill it out now? But then I'm like, well, what would change my mind?
Yeah.
That I couldn't think of anything that would change my mind.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, which is
Yep.
bad. I mean, it's not a position you want to be in, right?
Well,
You don't want to feel like that. I want to, as an informed citizen, as somebody who really cares about our system of government and where we're headed, I don't like that feeling. But it is
so
what
you
it
don't
is.
know. The answer is you don't know who's going to win. You're
No,
not sure.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
there's some
it's
days where I feel like Trump's going to win and he's going to win easily, and there's other days where I'm like, I'm not sure. I don't know. I just don't know.
I would say mine is the opposite, right? I'm either Kamala's going to win. Kamala's going to win going away, or Trump is going to squeak it out. That's see, I'm a little. That's how I would, but I don't have a feeling either way. But if I was going to say that somebody was going to win big, I would put it at her rather than him.
Yeah.
Um, and I can't give you a reason why.
I'm just.
That's just a gut.
Yeah. The first time he won, I knew it. I knew he was going to win ahead of time. I think we made a bet pretty early on, and you were like, "There's no way he's going to win." So he's going to win. And the reason I could tell is just message boards of just innocuous websites, like going to a music website, and people by the dozens would be posting in the comments of some music article about Trump.
Well, that's yeah, that's interesting. 'Cause
And yeah,
I think that's what I'm feeling too, and that's why I think she has a higher upside because just knowing us as a country, we like new and fresh, and I think his stale date is sort of wearing now.
yeah, I think he doesn't have that excitement factor anymore.
Right.
That's for sure. I think Kamala's a terrible candidate, though. I mean,
She wouldn't be my candidate. She wouldn't be my
candidate at all, and that's another thing that plays into it for me is like there's a lot of people who do not want to hear her cackling for 4 years, and I'm one of them.
Although, yeah.
I'd rather live 4 years of, well, we'll see what happens, roll the dice, than 4 years of I know I'm going to have to hear her cackling on TV once a day.
You just can't take that.
I just can't. It's
4 years,
awful.
it's going to be 8 years, Bob. 8 years.
Well, it becomes 8 years, right?
Your daughters will grow up under Kamala Harris. It'll be like, me when Reagan was president. I grew up basically under Reagan.
The thing about Tennessee, though, is that they're learning in school through their friends, like Trump, 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 Trump,
Oh,
Trump, Trump,
jeez.
Trump, Trump.
Bob, what have you done?
It's, I mean, it's a thing down here.
I would imagine.
And being from Illinois and such a liberal state where people didn't talk politics as much and as openly, people love to talk politics
Really?
here, and they
Wow.
love to talk Trump, and it's
That's
just
interesting.
it really is. And even people from other states, like it's just it's fantastic. I don't know, it's interesting. And yeah, I'm not a like I said, I'm not a I would not consider myself a Trumper,
Right.
but it's a different thing. But on the other hand, polling too, right? I look at polling and how Trump's polling versus how he polled against Biden and how he polled against Clinton, and his numbers are in comparison strong right now.
Yeah, I don't know about polling. I just don't know.
I don't know either, and
Like you've pointed out, who's answering the phone, and
yeah,
I don't know if it's as effective as it once was. Clearly, it isn't. Um, but it should indicate something. I think it just indicates that it's close. Um, but I think there's a lot of factors that end up going into who votes where and all that stuff that may not be reflected in polls, but who knows? We'll see. We'll see. So we wanted to cover one more thing tonight, which
I like this subject.
I think JD brought it up, right? Clearly, the right has. My other conservative friend has been getting on this for a while, and clearly it's where they're headed with the offset. The Democrats have painted Trump as a threat to democracy, and we've talked about whether he is or not. So I think to offset that, the left, I mean the right, has brought up this freedom of speech issue, right? That they're saying it's actually the Dems that are the threat to democracy. They're the totalitarians, and this is why, right? So I think that's why it's more in the air, but definitely this John Kerry. I don't know if everyone's heard about it, but I think it was this week, right?
Yep.
And I pulled up to actually pull up exactly what he said. It was at the World Economic Forum. There was a panel, and I think they were talking. He's kind of the climate change czar still. I've never been a huge fan of John Kerry.
Me
just
either.
just to put it out there, I don't think he was a good presidential candidate. I don't think I voted for him back then.
Was he actual? Did he win the nomination? I
Yeah,
can't remember.
he was 2004.
Okay, that's right.
Carrie Edwards. You remember John Edwards?
Yes, I do. Yeah,
He had a
from Virginia.
he
Yeah,
had a North Carolina. I
or
think.
Northern North Carolina. Yeah.
He had a problem with an affair
Mistress.
too. Yeah,
Yeah, and a baby.
a payoff, hush money, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and just sent you one about Doug Imhoff.
Come on, they're painting the first gentleman as an abuser, which I think
And a
is in the
philanderer.
I think is in the record, and a philanderer, which I think is in the record too.
Hmm.
So
Kamala, since she doesn't do interviews, won't have to answer any questions on it, though.
but there you have it. All right, getting back to John Kerry. So basically, I'll bring up his quote here. So he says, "But look, if people only go to one source, and the source they go to is sick," he says, "and has an agenda, and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to hammer it out of existence. What we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change." That's what he said, which is not a great thing to say.
Mm-mm.
I'm not a First Amendment free speech absolutist, but to say that could be construed very poorly. So and then we get into the issue of censorship, right?
Yep.
So what he's saying is,
We need to stop these people from saying what they want to say if we don't agree with what they're saying.
now you do realize this country, for all its faults, probably has, I think, the First and Second Amendment, which Second Amendment we just talked about, and our First Amendment are sort of our absolute gold, and I don't think anywhere else in the world values those two things as much as we do.
I would say not.
So we do have a lot of free speech in this country. So we're going from that basis, right? We're I was reading about Britain, and they can't say much without being pulled
No,
under
they
the.
can't.
And
People are getting longer sentences in Britain for saying things than they are for raping people.
Again, it's things that we don't necessarily understand about the rest of the world. But yeah, we're definitely on the high end of the free speech range, if not the most free speech of anywhere else in the world. So, given that, then we could talk from that perspective, right? It's not like we're locking anyone up. I don't know anyone who's gotten locked up for saying anything, other than slander,
Inciting.
right. We do have certain kind of basic. I don't think you can physically threaten someone.
Yeah.
You can't call in a bomb threat.
Fire in a theater,
right.
I think.
Bomb threats,
Yeah.
fire in a theater, stuff like that, which I assume you agree with.
Yeah, I think that's.
So you're not a free speech absolutist.
There's not really value in yelling fire in a theater.
So you're not
fire in a theater.
You do believe that there should be some restrictions on speech. You agree?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're just talking about what the relative, right? I mean, it's just, right. So, and given that we haven't locked anyone up yet, and even though they've, jawboned Facebook to take things off, and clearly there's the Twitter files, and you got Barry Weiss and Matt Taibbi, who are on the left saying, this is an issue, and I hear it. I mean, I get it. We don't want to go down that path, right? But is it that big an issue? Is it the threat to democracy issue that they're presenting it to be?
Will be if they want to do away with the First Amendment.
He said it's a roadblock, and I agree it's a roadblock. I mean, is it not a roadblock? If you,
it should be. It's designed to be a roadblock.
Well, it is. So we agree that it's a roadblock. He's not lying.
No, it's a roadblock for the government. Yes.
It's a roadblock for whoever that I can voice my opinion on something, whether it's correct or it doesn't have to be correct, right? I could willfully spread misinformation as much as, or not even opinion. I can spread lies.
No, there's libel laws. There's libel laws. You can't do it.
Well, I can't lie about a living person. You can lie about a dead person, which is interesting. But you can't lie about a living person. But that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about, I would imagine in regards to climate change or COVID or whatnot that have been part of this issue over time, that the government, which you agree the government, does the government have a kind of a parental role? Does it have, should it be looking out for the interests of the population or society? Or no? We're all on our own?
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So
those are the things that should protect. But what about life? So, and I would say pursuit of happiness and liberty. Climate change all sort of gets into that, right? Doesn't it? It's hard to pursue happiness when the world is burning, right? Or you're not able to breathe your air. So, right?
You can find a scientist that's going to tell you both that climate change is man-made and that climate change is not man-made.
Yeah, you could pay a
cycle, right?
scientist to say anything. You could pay an
You sure
accountant to,
can. Yeah.
you could pay an accountant to save money to
And you can
tell you the
certainly
answer. Right.
pay a politician to say anything, but you give the politician the power to decide, to define what's real and what's truth and what's not. That's where it gets very dangerous.
I agree. I mean, it's hard to determine absolute truth, especially in science, right? Science is science. You've got consensus and theories and hypothesis and all of that. The world is flat until it's proven otherwise, right? So there is that scientific method and debate. So you're weighing that against, well, do I need to protect people? Sort of, do I need to? The government has a role. Does the government have a role in saying, well, if this information is out there, maybe our people will not be protected because they'll think this rather than that. And I mean, it's a valid argument. You could say, well, it's up to people to be smart and decide. The government shouldn't be involved in that, but I think there is somewhat of a gray area on that, and especially with social media and all the information that's thrown to us now. It's a vast, it's the Wild West, right?
I think it's also important to remember who the gatekeepers are, and it's always a bureaucrat of some sort who's got a lot of self-interest.
Yeah, I mean, you get into the Big Brother thing,
And so with absolute free speech, you don't have to worry about any of that.
Well, we agree that we don't have absolute free speech,
You know.
and that's been proven and held up in courts as being constitutional.
Yeah, there's a fine line between, okay, yelling fire in a crowded theater. There's no value in that speech. The only thing that's going to result in is a lot of people getting hurt. Right? That's not entertainment. Maybe it is entertainment to somebody, but it's not entertainment. The news programs nowadays, there's always probably a little bit of truth in everything. But when it comes to that, there's also entertainment value, right?
All right, to that extent, let's say, this is a hypothetical, but it might have happened. Let's say you're a very influential person. You're a scientist. You put out a study that says, well, these vaccines that the government's asking you to take will lead you to be infertile. They contain a microchip that is going to be tracking you. No basis in reality, right? And that information is out there. And in a social media, millions of people see that. This person has influence amongst a certain group of the population. And you're saying the government shouldn't have anything to do with that.
I am.
That's not their role to try to get that removed or minimized or whatever.
I'm saying it's against the Constitution for them to do anything with it.
So how's that different than yelling fire in a crowded theater?
One's an idea and one's a provocation.
I would say they're both provocations. The reality is that the fire doesn't exist, right? You just want to get people to panic. And the reality is there is no microchip in the vaccine, and it's not going to make you infertile. But you could come up with a study, you could print something, you can have millions of people read it, and you're saying that's absolutely fine.
There's not time to do a study about the fire in the theater. Now, any smart individual is probably going to sit up and think, do I smell smoke? Do I see fire? Do I see smoke? Right? But the time frame, and actually, I was doing some reading on this too. I don't know, fire in a crowded theater, actually, I think originally it was an exception, and I think that actually got reversed, and I think there's actually some sort of a right now
that
when
you
it
could
comes to that. You can yell fire in a theater. I think if you believe it, if you believe it's there, right? The government will have to prove you didn't actually believe there was a fire, and that makes
Yeah,
it
I
difficult
I
too,
agree
right?
that that would be part of it. I mean, again, we haven't thrown anyone in jail. This is, at least at this point, this is just the government saying to these media platforms, social media platforms, yeah, we believe this is mis or disinformation.
Hmm.
We'd very much like that you take it down. I don't know how they've worded it, but clearly there's been conversations like that. You could call it coercion, you could call it persuasion. Nobody's been locked up. No company's been fined for not taking down the information.
They may have not been granted a contract
But
or a beneficial law.
I understand the slippery slope theory, but I don't think we're at the slippery slope. So I do think the government does have a role if somebody's putting out who has influence, clearly false information that threatens the health of society and my country directly. Yeah, I think the government should have a role in saying something about that. Do I think they should lock those people up? Again, if you're doing a court of law, then you would have to prove that they did it on purpose, that they willfully tried to deceive people either through fraud or whatnot. I suppose it could be under a fraud
So would you
statute.
abolish or abridge or amend the First Amendment?
No, you don't need to do it.
All right. So is Kerry arguing for that? Because it sure sounds
No,
like it.
I think he's saying that it is something that we have to contend with when we talk about misinformation. I think he's acknowledging it. I don't think he got into what his plans were to do about that. I think you can dream of any scenario that you want. The fact of the matter is, it hasn't occurred yet. Um, so anything would be a hypothetical at this point. I do think it's an issue that we have to wrestle with as a society, as a country, given our First Amendment, because I think it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. Um, and I think people are going to get more confused. I don't think we should have a Department of Truth. Any talk of that is kind of Big Brother-ish to me. But to some extent, we're going to have to wrestle with it somehow and decide on what the role is. And I think I think it's good to debate it. I think people will have different views, but um, I think it's something that we shouldn't just make it a. I hate when things become politicized because then we can't have rational discussion about it, right? You got to be in one camp or the other. And I think there's so much gray here that it, you say, well, you're throwing out the First Amendment. Well, that's not really what my belief is, but I believe that there is a role. I don't necessarily know what that role is or what the line is, and I think we as a society should talk about that.
If I, as an average citizen, want to post on my Facebook page that I think Kamala's a lizard person, I certainly should have that right. And if a
Does
million people want to share that, they certainly, I think, should have that right, right?
well,
So I don't know
does
what
that
the difference between that is and your argument about the
well
vaccines, right?
well you're calling Kam, Kamala a lizard person doesn't affect necessarily the health and welfare of your country, right? That's uh, unless you could draw that parallel. I don't see the parallel. It's a hypothetical,
If
but I
if
wouldn't put it in the
vaccine
same book.
companies are paying scientists and media organizations and social media organizations to censor posts or government officials to either censor posts or positively promote their vaccine, that hasn't even been fully approved by the FDA or other organizations within the government, health organizations, then how is that any less dangerous potentially than what you're implying, the microchip thing?
So you're saying,
It's agenda driven.
let's say there's a bad vaccine there, and somebody's paying a bureaucrat to censor information about that bad
Sure.
vaccine in the interest of protecting society.
hmm Fauci came out in the last few days or so and said, yeah, we know that the COVID vaccine causes myocarditis, especially in young men. He said it on TV,
Okay,
right? That was being said
I don't know.
months and months and months ago, and it was getting censored off Facebook. It was being removed. People weren't being informed because government and officials and the pharmacies, either through government officials or more directly, I'm not sure, were influencing these organizations to censor that. And news
Well,
organizations knew it, and they also weren't reporting on it.
well, one, I don't know the facts of this case one way or another, so it's hard to speak about the particulars in regards to timing of the knowledge and whatnot, um, and what was censored and the way it was censored. I have no idea. But I would say if what you're presenting is correct, then that's wrong, right? The people who
That's why
I
the
don't know
freedom
if
of
you're saying
speech
money
aspect is
flowed that way or
necessary.
lobbying or whatnot. But I'm saying that somebody should be accountable for that. That's what I'm saying. Whatever way that works, somebody should be accountable for it, right? And
Well,
you're saying nobody
in
should be accountable for anything.
the
That's your position. Nobody should be accountable for anything, and I'm saying, well, if that case that you presented happened, people should be accountable for that. They should lose their job. They should end up in jail, whatnot, which then will keep them honest for not doing that again. And you're saying
but when it
just
happens,
let whatever go out there. We don't need
you have the
any help.
counterbalance on social media of individuals, or in some cases, independent news organizations to at least balance that out.
I think people should be held accountable, right? I think if you're a bad player in one way or another, if you're in the government or if you're outside the government, people should be accountable for their actions. And you're saying we don't need accountability. We need just the Wild West, and whatever things land will land. So I'm not supporting government taking down information. I'm not that should have rightfully been out there. I don't want that any more than I want misinformation to be out there. So I think if you held people accountable, then I think you would see less of that sort of activity too, just as you would see less of misinformation out there if those people were accountable for putting it out there. If you're a bad actor and you're clearly a bad actor, you should be accountable
Yeah.
for that under the laws of this country.
Well, in the Fauci case, it's a government official censoring
Right.
a
They
message and lying.
they should lose
Where
their job. They should
in
be
the other
fined.
cases, it's a free speech matter, right? And without having that free speech, you're giving the government bureaucrats more control and the ability to manipulate.
But if you held everyone accountable for it, then you would hopefully have people who would either think before they posted something, right? Or think before they ask somebody to take some information down. So I think as a society, we would be better off with that accountability rather than no accountability. Now, yes, it would be difficult to prove one way or another, and we do have courts that could adjudicate such things. But I think having that as our system, accountability for what you say and what you do, um, will put, you might call it a a chill to the First Amendment, but I would say it makes us accountable as citizens to our fellow
Yeah,
citizens.
but all right. So let's just say, I don't know, somebody I trust tells me, or somebody I'm friends with, or whatever, however you want to put it, tells me as a citizen or just as a friend, like I believe or I know or it's obvious that the, I don't know, let's just say Trump assassination or whatever was an inside job, right? So I say, hey, I heard this and I believe it. And then my friend says, I heard this and I believe it. I heard this. I'm not willfully or knowingly spreading false information, whether it's true or false, right? So trying to hold American citizen or any other person for that matter accountable for the things they say or believe gets really messy really fast.
Well, that would be a tough situation. I think there are other hypotheticals that you would come up with which would be more clear cut
Well, I think
as being
climate change is
as being a
real,
bad
but I
actor.
think it's not man-made, and I think the idea that it's man-made and we need to spend billions and billions of dollars to stop it is bullshit. But if the government truth agency tells me that it's dangerous for me to say that because I'm going to kill the world and make all the animals extinct, now all of a sudden I'm breaking the law and I'm going to go to jail or pay a fine.
Well, I would hope that you would have I would hope that you would have some backing to what you're saying, right?
Well, how about just logic, common sense?
Okay. Or I would say that there's probably much more clear cases where people are bad actors. I think that would be the low hanging fruit before some of the cases that you present.
You can't hold an Italian in Italy responsible for saying something online that he didn't say in America. And he's not even protected by the First Amendment right? So therefore, this Italian citizen now has spread a rumor, and Americans start believing it, and they believe it, and it's wildfire. Now who's at fault? Who's liable in this matter?
You got a lot of hypotheticals, Bob.
I'm just I'm just throwing out there when you start limiting First Amendment at any point, it
That's
gets
the slippery
really,
slope.
really messy.
I get the slippery
Not
slope.
to mention it can't pretty much can't be done because you're never going to amend the
You could
Constitution.
always
You're
come
never
up
going to
with
get a constitutional amendment again unless it's under like a really, really dire circumstance, and we'll never see that in our lifetimes. I don't think.
plus to your point in regards to the constitutional amendment and whatnot. I think the way the court system is currently configured, I don't think there's any chance that anything even remotely touching the First Amendment will be ruled as constitutional. So I think we're protected. I do think that this is a argument about democracy that's sort of a culture issue that is kind of muddying the waters. I don't think it's a real threat at all, for the reasons I just stated, and
It
the
just
reasons
comes
that you
off of
stated. The
we're
reasons that you
losing
stated.
we're losing the talking points, and I agree. It just comes off as like a desperate
So
attempt to say we're losing, so we want to take
I
your
don't.
ability to say stuff away.
So I guess my bottom line is I don't see it as the existential issue that they're presenting it as. I think it's a political ball. I think the left stupidly falls into the trap a lot of times by saying stuff like this without thinking how it's going to be portrayed, and
There's plenty of idiots on the
they,
right too.
they just give them ammunition, right? So that's how I would conclude it. I mean, I do think that we need to wrestle with this as a society longer term, but I do think we have so many protections within the First Amendment. Number one being our judicial system, which has been stacked to the right now quite a bit from a federal and circuit court and you name it. I think there's pretty strong constitutionalists in the court system now, strict constitutionalists that I don't think anything will get near, just like the Second Amendment. I don't think anything's going to near touching our First Amendment, right or wrong.
I agree.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to happen.
So,
but it's just interesting that you do have John Kerry and Democrats besides other than him saying the same thing, kind of.
I agree. It's stupid.
It's dumb.
Just because it's a very nuanced issue, and unfortunately, it's politicized, which often prevents us from actually dealing with stuff. Unfortunately, and that's a bigger issue that we need to get our hands around in this country, so we could actually talk about things rather than make everything a political football that everyone's got to take one side or another on.
I'm not exactly sure why or what it is, but for some reason I almost always imagine John Kerry and Mitt Romney as the same person.
They could be. Has anyone seen them in the same place at the same time? Maybe he ran as a Republican president because he lost as a Dem.
Because I do see Mitt Romney as a rhino, and most rhinos, Republican in name only, are very similar to the establishment Democrats.
You can't tell them apart.
Right. I mean, you might not hear Mitt Romney arguing for a lot of the climate change stuff that John Kerry is, but damn well guarantee that Mitt Romney would vote for it if it was in a bill that he wanted passed for some other reason. You know what I mean?
They're billionaire globalists. What do you want?
Exactly.
What do you want from them?
Yeah, exactly.
They want the music to keep playing.
Very interesting.
All right. Well, we better wrap it up.
All right.
Very, very interesting discussion on censorship. I liked it.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully,
Can't wait till the next one.
Hopefully, our audience wakes up before the end.
If you're still awake, what's wrong with you?
Good night,
good
everybody.
night.
Maybe we could sell it as a sleep aid, like ASMR. Maybe we should do the ASMR thing, scratch and putting people.
Fentanyl light.
We'll repackage the podcast as a sleep aid.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.